Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a conversation on creativity. In this episode, you'll hear actress Geraldine Dulex talking about her acting process. As an actress, to give truth to her characters, she has to really be truthful to herself and be vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of the ingredients that gives creativity and honesty to the performance. But sometimes, an actress can experience it in a weird way on stage, by forgetting her lines. Listen to what Geraldine told me about what happened to her. But before, she told me what she tried to do all her life.
All my life, I've always tried to be honest.
What does it mean for an actress to be honest?
A lot. First of all, I think as an artist, you have something to say. And because you have something to say, it has to come from you and it has to come from within. I think for me also to be an artist is to, be true to myself, be true to the world and give something to people, to have people come to the theater, see the world a little differently and see something new about themselves as well. So I think for you to give truth, you have to really be truthful yourself as well. And truthful also equals honesty and not put on layers, but really shed those layers and be as much yourself as you can.
Is there a clue for you that you are experiencing this inner truth?
I wish there was. Because if there was, I think it would make art a little easier. And I think that's one of the hard parts about it. I think certainly sometimes you feel so connected and so right in the moment. But then there are moments where you're like, oh no, this didn't go so well. And oh, I didn't feel so good about this. But then someone will come up to you and you're like, that's the best I've ever seen you do. So I think it's very difficult to know when you're truly, how did you put it? In what words? When you're truly...
The inner truth.
Yeah, when you truly live your inner truth. And I think also the inner truth changes. I think it morphs with you as you grow, your inner truths grow. And you learn more about yourself and the world and your experiences enforce who you are.
Do you trust more yourself or someone else?
No, I think you trust more yourself, especially in everyday life. I think more in art, it becomes a little more subjective, what that is. But otherwise, no, I think it has to come from you. Absolutely.
Is it possible to perform from a place which is not a place of truth?
I think it depends on your character. But I think you, as an actor, that's my job to find the truth. And if this person that I'm portraying is not living in truth, then that is, another variable that I have to work with. But I think you have to be so specific. And I think that's the beautiful thing, too, about getting to do a show over and over and many times. That truth also changes, or your perception changes. You learn something new. And just because the first performance you did it one way doesn't mean that this performance where I'm doing it kind of differently now, where it's morphed, it's not the same truthfulness, so to speak.
Was there an alternative for you when you came to acting?
I was once at a crossroads where I went back to Switzerland. I'm from Switzerland. It was a time where my health was a little rocky, and it's always good to go back to family and be really supported. And I just happened to go to a job interview, someone my dad knew, because I was there for a little bit to kind of just feel better. And the gentleman immediately offered me a job, and he knew I had a show coming up in Chicago that I was going to go and do the show in Chicago. And then he offered me a job basically in this company, which was really a business job, in an office, an 8 to 5, and for a lot of money. And it really was a tough decision. Suddenly you're like, oh, I could go back to Switzerland and live with my family, have a nice salary, go out for dinner, be with, my old friends, and, kind of have a really nice supported life. It was an international company, so I could still use my languages and travel. But I mean, if you really listen to your gut feeling, and I did, even though it was hard at the time, I was like, I can't do that. I can't. So no, there's no alternative like that, really. This is just what I want to do. I want to be in the arts, and I want to, give that to people and do that.
Do you remember your first role on stage?
My first role on stage. Oh, actually, I was Maria and Joseph in the Christmas story. That was my first role. There are still photos of me, dressed as Mary and, with the little baby Jesus in my arms.
Why do you consider it your first role? I thought you were talking about something later in your life.
For me, kind of the turning point where I knew I wanted to do theater was in Switzerland, you go to primary school for 6 years, and then you go to an Oberstufe. And so in my first year at that school, we created our own play. I just kind of signed up for this class, and we performed it. And that role that we played there was we did a playback of a song, so kind of like the mini playback show. You pretended like you were singing, but you weren't really singing. And we did a Backstreet Boys song. And just that feeling of being on the stage and having the whole audience just go with you and clap. And it was something that they were feeling, that they were reflecting back to us, that just felt so good. When I got off stage, I was like, this feeling I want to have forever. So I guess maybe officially, like when you say, wait a second, you were thinking of something else, that's a role that I thought of, but definitely Mary was my first role.
Talking about voice, how did you find your true voice? Was it a journey? Was it challenging for you?
Definitely a journey, and the journey that continues. I think coming from Europe, when I went to college, with voice, I guess also comes language in the theater. And my English is not my native tongue. So coming to college in the States and studying theater, it was very much like, where is my track? Where would I go? So I think that was, my voice kind of was more through my body at the beginning on stage. So then whenever there were auditions where it says, oh, mask play, they were like, oh, Geraldine, this is perfect for you, because it's more expression. So I almost would say that my body first in the theater was my voice. And then I really learned in college to really take on more of an inside out, where you really look at the character and what is this character saying or thinking, and why is this person saying this now? And I think the voice also is something that I really learned in college, because my acting teacher too, every day we had to sit down and watch one person, and for a whole page write everything that person was doing. I mean, very secretly. That person could not know that you were watching them. But what is this person doing? And just describe every detail you saw. And then also kind of giving that person a voice. What do you think this person goes back to? What could this person possibly do? And so I also figured out, who am I? And it made me look at myself. What is my voice? And what can I bring to the table? And I think that way I really learned to, kind of figure out what it is that I care about and where I belong. And I think when you first start out, you're kind of maybe pinholed a little more. And then you kind of branch out and you're like, oh, actually, I think I'm very good at this. And then in college, I did mime, and even though we don't talk, we still have a voice. And yes, a voice you think of, I've never formulated this really, but I think a voice, you think of something that you hear, right? Something you have a voice, you talk. But I think also a voice in the arts is, what is it that you're saying? What is the noise that you're making,
Is it about your energy? Is it about your style?
I think also, but I think it's also about what it is that you want to say and how you want to use your voice. Yes, so do you, for example, if I'm a mime and we write our own shows, or what is it that we want to say? What is our voice now at this time, 2019 in New York? What is it that we want to say? Whereas I think when you lend your voice to a play, let's say you're in an Arthur Miller play, I get to play a role there. What is my voice as Geraldine in this? So I'm really filtering myself through that character. Yeah, so I think you have to be true to your voice, and I think your voice changes and what you want to say. Yeah.
So we come back to the notion of honesty.
Yeah, I think always just to break down those layers. And I think that's something, that you will never have finished learning.
About your lines, how do you do to learn your lines? I'm always very curious about that.
I love this question. I think it always depends for what project a little bit, but I think doing research first and first, of course, read the project, know what the play is, who wrote it, when it was written, who this character is that you're playing, and then really kind of seeing what this character's function is, really just kind of understanding everything first.
The context.
The context, absolutely. And then going into the play and kind of, going through the lines and going through it. Oh, okay, so here's a big break. And kind of, I just take notes. And then I work with a lot of colors. And I kind of break it into beats and which words seem to be important, why this word here. I also go to the lexicon and look up a lot of the words or see what are synonyms for those words, or if a word doesn't really ring true to me, what is it in Swiss German or in German, for example. And so when you do that work, it almost automatically comes to you, the text. And then I usually record the other person's lines and leave the space for me. And so I find myself just kind of repeating it, going through, of course, reading the play over and over, or whatever the script, whatever it is. And it actually comes quite easily. I think the challenge then more is how can you really, navigate through everything, that it doesn't seem en route, that it feels alive every time, that it doesn't become just a memorized text, and to find all these nuances.
That's the core of a performance on stage.
Yeah, I think so. And I think memorization is just a part of that.
How do you do to make it always live on stage?
Good question. I think for every play, it's a little different for me, how I prepare, what I need. And it took me a while to realize this. But I always think that you have to come with such, you have to feel so good and pump yourself up and be so ready no matter what happens. I am there, I am here, I am open, I am vulnerable. And I think sometimes before I go on stage, I'm like, oh no, what if I forget like all those lines here and then this happens? But it doesn't happen. You know your stuff. You have to just trust yourself. You have to trust that you did the work. You have to trust that, you've done this enough times that you know what you're doing and that the people around you have your back. And you've worked on this for so long. So I think when you go out there and you just kind of, with all that preparation and you let it happen and you are vulnerable and you are real at that moment, yeah, it's bound to just soar, fly.
Is it necessary to be vulnerable, to be real?
Absolutely, it's necessary to be vulnerable because I think a vulnerability also is an openness, and I think if you are the opposite of being vulnerable is kind of being closed off. And in life, even now, you and I'm listening to you, you're listening to me, we're having a conversation, the energy goes back and forth. And if I just kind of close myself off, then that normal interaction that happens between people normally won't come across. So I think that automatically is a vulnerability that you have on stage, that you can't put any guards up or anything like that.
So vulnerability is openness. We can put it like this.
Yeah, I think it's more than openness, but it's definitely openness and willingness, ready to play, ready to have someone's back, ready to be there. But vulnerable, being open and being there, and here I am, let's do this, and it's again different for, on camera, or or if you're a mime, or it's just I think it always kind of depends on the project that you're doing. But I think vulnerability is one of those things that just also gives honesty to the performance.
Talking about vulnerability, have you ever forgotten your lines on stage?
Forgotten.
That's really scary.
Yeah, that's really scary. I have never forgotten. I mean, I don't, not that I can remember right now, actually.
Of course.
But I guess I would pretend. I would try to get that out of my brain real fast. No, but what has happened to me is that I skipped a big chunk. I was on stage with 3 other people, and I will never forget. And I thought that director that I was going to work with, who'd already given me the part and everything, was going to come see this show. And so I somehow had this in my head, and I couldn't be completely vulnerable to what's happening to me on stage, because somehow I had this in the back of my head, even though I tried not to. But then suddenly I skipped a part, and everybody just went with me, and it was fine. But I didn't realize I'd skipped it until suddenly I was like, oh, where is that part? And then in my brain, it just went, oh my God, I just skipped half a page. And everyone was such pros, and they just went with me, and it worked out fine. But that's the other beautiful thing about art. And, if someone forgets something, and I think that's something that I'm actually quite good at, if I may say so myself. But if somebody drops something or drops a line, you have someone there to support you. And I can be like, oh, but, you were going to say this, and how about this and this? Oh, yes, this and this, Nobody else would know. So you kind of, you have each other's backs, and you figure it out that way. But when I skipped that part, I felt really bad. But otherwise, it's something that just doesn't really, it seems like it would happen, but it doesn't really happen. And if you suddenly have one of these brain farts, as they call it, there's other people there to come and support. And I think it's just an inherent trust, that you have to trust yourself, that you know it. You've done it so many times in rehearsal. You have it.
Of all the roles you've played, which one is the closest to you as a person?
Whoa. It's, this is a really tough question, and I'm probably not going to answer it the way you'd like. But what I find so unbelievable is that sometimes, there's certain roles where I'm like, oh, this is a perfect role for me, maybe a little bit more, kind and maybe motherly or whatever. But then there's these other roles where, I get to play a Nazi. And it seems like it's so far removed. But then when you really go and do that research, how would I, Geraldine, have been able to come close to, join the Nazi party at the time, and then actually move up the ranks and become, let's say, an Oberaufseherin in a concentration camp? You go through these steps, and even though I don't feel close to this person at all, there's still something that connects you, where I'm like, this is almost scary. It really seems like such an easy slip. And when people see me play, I don't know, I just play so many different roles that sometimes it's so difficult, but all those things are inside you. So I think there's something so amazing about being able to go deep, and all these people are just humans, and that's when you understand we all have a basic needs. We want to be loved, we want to love, we want to be noticed. Once you take all that stuff apart, all these characters kind of almost blend together. And while I love to play, more of a bitchy character, and I think also people have told me that I play extreme states really well, like someone who's drunk or high, That's not really me, but it's something that still feels close.
Do you like taking risks on stage?
Oh, absolutely.
What is a risk on stage? Can you define what a risk is?
I think there's a lot of different risks you can take on stage. I think the risk can be with the material. which also depends, are you doing something in Europe? Are you doing something here in the States? Whilst, some European plays are a little more risky, I would say, than traditional American plays. It's doing something like that here, and you're kind of taking a risk by taking material that people are maybe kind of put off with. But if you do it well and you understand why you do it, you understand what it's all about. I think that's a risk. I think one of those, and I had a play that I saw in Europe at the French Festival that I just loved. It was about a woman who had made a film, and she feels very strongly that it is not pornography, so it has to go through a censor in order to be sold. But the censor very clearly says this is pornography, and to him, he's like, look at these lines, look at this, and she's like, no, but can't you see the connection between them, or this means this? And so material like that was a British play, in Europe with Sarah Kane too, that was kind of more of a norm, but I really wanted to bring that to the States. And I did. And I produced it, and we did it in a site-specific place. And I think that was one of those moments where I really took a risk. And I remember my mom coming to rehearsal. My parents did not get to see the show. And I don't know really how I would have felt about it. But that was really a risk, and
A personal risk.
A personal risk. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of these plays where, you go so far. And I think if my parents would have come, they've seen me do a lot of crazy stuff.
What do you mean by going so far?
Well, in that play, she really is, she so strongly believes, she's so convinced about her project that she goes to lengths to really convince the censor. And there is a part in the play, see again, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but where she realizes how the censor ticks. And then she takes a poop on stage for him to, it releases something for him that then he can, so to speak, give himself over to her. A moment like that, if you do that for the sensation, or if you do that for the shock or whatever, it's not going to work. But you have to trust the people you work with and understand, how these people tick, and be vulnerable and be real on stage for that to really, and understand why it's there and what these people deal with in order for that to come across. And I think those are risks that I can think of right now, I think, in my life, in my experience.
There's a good reason.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's important to have a reason why, because that's why I feel like why I do what I do.
What do you expect from a director for your acting?
I love working with directors. It's so cool because, so often you audition and you work on your own material. So you go out there and you do a monologue or you work on a scene, but you don't really have someone who, walks you through, not walks you through step by step, but who's by your side. You come in, you bring it kind of formed, but then with the director, you can really carve out things and have a conversation back and forth. And I've been very lucky. I feel like I've worked with wonderful directors who have always been very sensitive and really, want to listen to what you have to say. So it's not just, okay, then you go over there and then you say that line, but it's like, okay, why do I go over there? This is not motivated. Sure, I have to motivate it myself, but if I feel like I can't motivate it, that conversation must happen, and I think that makes a good director.
Did you experience to delve too deeply into characters you've played?
I don't know if there is a too deeply. I think then you learn and then you move on. You're like, maybe that was a little too far.
What would it mean?
I guess it would mean that you can't let the character go. So you play, and then the play is over, you go home, and you still live in that world. I think you have to be careful with that. Parts of that character, especially if you live with it for a long time, will kind of come in and out, but you can't have that character rule your world. I think I would probably consider that going too far.
What happens when you have to stop playing a role? Do you have to mourn your character when you stop playing it?
Deep depression. No, I'm exaggerating. Yes, absolutely. I think it's especially harder when you first get your first roles and you're like, oh my gosh, now I never get to play this again. And I think also the community that happens, now I never get to play with these people again. And it's just, especially in the theater, it's a death. I mean, it's a death of something that has been so intense and so wonderful and so much part of your life. You see the set come down, costumes go away, suddenly you're like, okay, this is over. And I think at the beginning, that hit me really hard. But I think now there's the saying that I guess maybe is a saying, or just that, I say too, is like, we'll play together again. There's always going to be another show. There is always going to be another show. So just, try to focus on that. And of course, also, I think one thing that I've become really good at is to kind of also celebrate what you've just done. Yes, I just did this. I just did this show. This was wonderful. I worked really hard. I gave my best. That was great. And kind of look at those positive things and celebrate yourself. And then go work really hard and get the next job.
I'm going to leave the room. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
Okay, it's just me and the microphone now. I truly think that dreams come true and you are worthy of your dreams and what you want to do, what you would like to try. And so I just really feel strongly about doing those things and trusting your inner voice and your gut that, yes, I want to do that. And then do it. And if it doesn't seem right or something else catches your attention, then, on your way, take another path. And that's absolutely fine. It's really about trusting your path. And failure is fine. So failure happens. You move on. Live fully, live beautifully, and do your best work. Best foot forward. That's it. Thank you, Philippe. J'ai fini.
Thank you, Geraldine Dulex, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Music, Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.